Hello everyone. On behalf of the GATS tutoring program, I would like to invite all the students to make use of a new initiative, which is the AP tutoring video series. So what we've done in this is our qualified students have basically broken the AP subjects unit by unit into simple 10-minute videos. We hope that these videos will come in handy for your test prep or for the AP exam prep. The subjects that we have worked on so far are AP World, AP Biology, AP Human, AP Psychology, and AP Calc AB. So if you would like to watch more videos like this, please be sure to subscribe to our GATS YouTube channel. And also, if you would like to be part of this initiative, please email us at gats-tutoring@gatamilsangam.org. Thank you.
Welcome back to AP Psychology Unit 4 Learning. This part of the exam is going to contain around 7 to 9%, so let's get into it. So first of all, we need to define what learning is. Learning is any relatively permanent change in behavior brought on by experience or practice. So whenever you practice something or do something, that is learning. You've learned that behavior. So let's talk about classical conditioning. This is one, if you remember from our first unit video, this is about behaviorism. This is a way that you can control behaviors. So let's talk about Ivan Pavlov. He is the father of classical conditioning, and he had his dogs experiment where he essentially, he accidentally conditioned dogs to respond to the sound of a bell. And they started to salivate whenever he sounded that bell, because they expected food whenever he sounded that bell. So he demonstrated that first instance of classical conditioning. So there's an order for classical conditioning. So in Ivan Pavlov's case, where he conditioned those dogs, he essentially gave them this unconditioned stimulus, right? The unconditioned stimulus was the food. And the unconditioned response was that they started salivating. Now, the neutral stimulus is the stimulus that you want to pair with the unconditioned stimulus, which will cause the dog to essentially associate that food with the bell or the whistle or whatever noise, right? So that's what Ivan Pavlov did. He rang a bell whenever there was food. And what that would do is that caused the dog to salivate. And then after that, even if he just rang the bell and didn't provide food, the dog would salivate expecting that food. So that's a form of learning, because that dog learned to salivate on the ring of a bell, even though that's not something that dogs are trained to, that dogs instinctively know how to do. We train that dog to associate two different things, like something like a bell with food, which is not, normal. So there are stages of learning. The first stage of learning is acquisition, where learning takes place and the unconditioned stimulus is paired with the conditioned stimulus. So if we go back here, the conditioned stimulus is our whistle, right? Then extinction happens whenever the conditioned stimulus is presented without the unconditioned stimulus. So say I ring that bell a couple of times and I don't give it food afterward, then the dog is going to start disassociate. It's not going to associate the bell with food anymore because it wasn't paired together anymore. And then spontaneous recovery sometimes happens where, accidentally or just randomly, there's a return of a previously extinguished conditioned response following a rest period. So even if there's no pairing of the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, spontaneous recovery sometimes happens just out of the blue. Okay, we also need to know the difference between generalization and discrimination. So stimulus generalization occurs when the conditioned stimulus has similar responses after the response has been conditioned. So let's say I have a bell and I have a whistle, and the dogs start salivating to both the bell and the whistle. So the dogs are generalizing that a loud sound means food. Then for stimulus discrimination, they differentiate between it. So say I sound a bell and I sound like a whistle, and the dog, salivates to the whistle, but it doesn't salivate to the bell. That means the dog has the ability to recognize the difference between that whistle and that bell. And one of the most infamous cases of this is the baby Albert experiment, which is a very unethical experiment where they take a little infant boy and they expose him to these white animals, and then each time, or white objects, right? Generally things that a baby isn't supposed to be afraid of, like a rabbit, a white rabbit, and it was a very friendly rabbit, baby's not afraid of it. And then they hit a really hard, like they make a really loud sound, and the baby instantly starts crying. And whenever they give a white object, they make a really, really loud sound, and they scare the baby. So now, whenever the baby sees a white object, it gets scared and it starts crying even before anything has happened, even without the loud sound. So they demonstrated the first thing of classical conditioning. Now, this is a very unethical experiment, but it does, and it wouldn't be allowed today, but it does demonstrate classical conditioning. Okay, let's talk about taste aversion. This is one of the strongest conditioned responses. Essentially, even if it's basically, we humans are very, very averse to taste. So if any thing happens, right, while we're eating a certain food, like say we feel nauseous while eating a certain food, we immediately develop aversion to that taste. And it's very, very powerful. It is one of the most powerful forms of conditioning. So just know that taste aversion is the most powerful form of conditioning. Okay, let's talk about the other type of conditioning, which is operant conditioning. And this has to do with rewards and punishments. This is probably one you're more familiar with. So operant conditioning is when you help create learning through rewards and punishment for behavior. And operant conditioners usually try to shape or the process, they use shaping. So they gradually guide an animal, or whenever you see those people at the zoo or people at the aquarium and they're like giving those treats to the dolphins to do tricks, that's a form of operant conditioning. So they're guiding an animal's actions toward a complex behavior. All right, let's talk about B.F. Skinner, and he's one of the most well-known names in operant conditioning. He essentially researched the different types of operant conditioning and the schedules of reinforcement, and he was really interested in how the consequence of people's actions influence their behavior. So he essentially designed this operant chamber, which was called the Skinner box, which held a rat or a pigeon, and could also hold a bar or a key that the animal could press in order to receive a reward. Now, there was another variation of this where an animal would receive a shock if it didn't click the bar or thing. I don't know if Skinner specifically did it, but there was also that. And essentially, what this proved is that the animal would associate hitting that bar to the reward, so it'd do that more often. Now, what in the other experiment where like they would shock the rat if it didn't hit the bar or key, the rat actually didn't understand what was going on, and that's called learned helplessness, which we'll get into on another slide. So these are some of the reinforcements types. So let's go over these quickly. So you have positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement, and positive punishment versus negative punishment. Now, the easy thing is just look at this chart real quick. So if you want to increase the behavior, you add something. So say you give a kid candy and tell them to do well on their next exam, that's positive reinforcement. I mean, if a kid does well on their next exam and you give them candy, that's positive reinforcement. So you're telling them, I will give you candy if you do well on your exam. And that, makes them do better on their exams. Negative reinforcement is when you remove something to increase the behavior. So let's say I give my kids ice cream after every single dinner. I'm not going to give them ice cream after a dinner if they get bad grades on their exam. That would be negative reinforcement. I'm telling them, I'm not going to give you dessert unless you get good grades on the exam. So positive punishment is when you add a positive, a punishment, not when you it's not a good thing. It's just positive as in adding. So a positive punishment would be something like, something that they did in the olden days. They used to spank kids. Oh, that's really bad. And, it's not a good parenting strategy. It's been disproved, but that would be positive punishment. You're introducing a punishment for something that someone did. Negative punishment is when you take away something. So say a car, say you're like really driving, you're like really late night, and you come back to your home very late night, and your parents are like, "Why did you come back so late? Like it's literally 1 a.m. right now." Um, and you say, "Okay," and then your parents are like, "Okay, I'm going to take away your car as punishment for you coming so late." That's negative punishment. You're taking away something that, you really want. Now these are other types of reinforcers. Now, there are primary and secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are things we inherently want, like food, water, shelter, all these things. And then secondary reinforcers are things we are trained to want. So those are also known as token reinforcers. So some stuff like money or tickets. You are trained to want those, right? Those aren't something we inherently need as humans. We want food and water or shelter and social acceptance and stuff like that. But money gets you food. Money gets you water. So, we're trained to like those, but they really don't have any value. Like the money's just paper, right? If society didn't say it had value, people would just know it didn't have value. So that's the difference there. Learned helplessness is something I went over before, but if you use negative punishment or positive punishment, punishments are really bad ways of reinforcing, because unless it's unless it's immediate and it's very strict. But here's the thing: a rat or something like, something with less brain power, like a smaller animal, usually doesn't have enough intellect to make the connection between that punishment and, not doing something. So it will just be helpless. It'll just be like, okay, I don't know what I can do. I'm just going to sit there and I guess I'm going to receive that. Like this in the Skinner box, the rat's just like, I'm going to receive that shock no matter what. I might as well just sit there and do nothing, which is what happened. It just learned to be helpless instead of trying to fix a way out of the scenario. And that happens a lot with humans as well, a lot of times as well. So it's not just, rats or animals. There's also superstitious behavior, which is another type of reinforcement. It's when there's an accidental reinforcement, right? And what happens is there's an accidental punishment or a negative thing that happens, and essentially it leads to this behavior that averts that negative thing at all costs. I mean, sometimes it's a thing that's not even that bad, but because it happened once, they're reinforced to never do that again, and that gets passed on, and that's how superstitions come about. Okay, now let's talk about reinforcement schedules. So a reinforcement schedule is essentially a pattern that defines how often a desired response will be reinforced. So these are the different types of reinforced schedules, right? You have fixed ratio schedules, which are essentially a reinforcement is given after an action is completed a fixed amount of times. So let's say I complete I throw out the trash 5 times, I earn $5 after I throw out the trash 5 times. And each time I do that, I get $5. That's a fixed ratio schedule. Now, a variable ratio schedule is it's a varying amount of time. Sometimes I throw out the trash, take out the trash 3 times, and then I'm given $5. And sometimes I have to take out the trash 10 times, and I'm given $5. So, it's varying. Fixed intervals is the amount of time in a time period. If you do a task, then you'll get a reward. So let's say homework. I have to do my homework for 30 minutes before I get a reward. And each 30 minutes I do it, I get a reward. That's fixed interval. And then variable interval is like, you have different amounts of time periods that you have to do. And it could be, we don't know how much time. So this is the amount of time and cumulative number of responses and how fast you can look at how fast these grow. So variable ratio and fixed ratio are the strongest reinforcers, and they create the most responses. Variable interval is slower, and fixed interval is the slowest because you just have to do it for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Like it's really not very strong. And in the middle, there's actually like a lower amount of effort put in because you have to do it the whole fixed amount of time, so why put in so much effort for it? But one thing to know is, while variable ratio has the faster acquisition, fixed interval is the most vulnerable, most least resistant to extinction, or most resistant to extinction. So fixed interval doesn't, go away really quickly. So if you train someone through fixed interval or train something, then it won't go away quickly. Okay, let's talk about cognitive learning. So the process of learning. So there are multiple ways people learn. One is observational learning, learning through watching others and then later replicating those behaviors. And then there's also mirror neurons, cells that fire both when an organism is doing a behavior and when it's observing another organism doing that behavior. Humans have these special neurons, and a lot of other animals do, that help us mirror behaviors, and they also allow us to understand motives behind behaviors. So it has a lot to do with empathy. So say I see someone, suffering through something, those mirror neurons may activate, and I might feel that same empathy. So that's how empathy works in some ways. Another experiment to know about this is the Albert Bandura and the Bobo doll. Bandura demonstrated that young children would imitate the violent, aggressive actions of an adult demonstrator. If, that adult was hitting that Bobo doll, then the child would as well. And this demonstrates learning by modeling. So a lot of times we, I think parents, and you probably have heard this discussion before, where, do video games cause people to be more violent? Do violent things cause people to be more violent? And according to this experiment, I mean, yes. So, that doesn't mean it's like end all be all. Experiments are not end all be alls, but that is true that aggressive behaviors do come, are modeled by children. So whether that debate is, true or not, that's up to us to figure out, but, that is there. Okay, types of learning. So you also have insight learning, latent learning, social learning, and emotional learning. Insight learning is when you have a sudden realization to a problem that just came to you. So like a light bulb moment. So just like, popped in there and you just like understood it immediately. Latent learning is learning that happens without your own awareness. So say you're taking notes and you're not really thinking about it, but you still like, remember some of what you took notes on. That's latent learning. Social learning is similar to modeling, but it's like learning from others that are close to the learner, or learning from society, stuff like that. And then emotional learning is our innate ability to learn to be sensitive and make relationships. And that's just a thing that humans do like without being taught. Okay, that is the end of AP Psychology Unit 4 learning. Next unit is Unit 5. Get ready for that one.